there is this drive to create tribal identity around a characteristic that has nothing to do with the individual, to just create a power structure that benefits your own group. That's the driving underlying political force, like the cast of bones. So when people say we are diverse because we have French speakers and German speakers, so we don't need to worry about what we are doing with Syrian refugees or whatever, right? But usually what I'm hearing is, let's look at this part we're doing well and not talk about this other part that's more uncomfortable, that's more difficult, what hasn't been resolved and is not about to get resolved. So again, people are always running from the fundamental underlying power conversation, because really, what do you do with that? How do you create a world that is free of that? It requires a real investment in imagination.
That was Sanhita Sen. We're so excited to kick off season 3 of the 906. This is Archita Fritz, your co-host on the 906, where we elevate the voices of women doing extraordinary things in their communities. This season, we choose to challenge, and we choose to elevate the voices of women choosing to challenge across all spheres of their influence. Joining me this season is Olivia Cream.
I'm so excited with Sanhita Sen, the Assistant District Attorney for Philadelphia. She shares how she is choosing to challenge 60 years of systemic racism in the criminal justice system as part of the Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission. Sanhita was born in Calcutta, India, and spent the majority of her childhood in Michigan and Virginia. She encourages us to be intentional in what we choose to challenge if we do have the privilege to do so. The heavy work is when you're standing up to be a voice on systemic racism. She believes we are all just molecules hurtling through space, and we should spend the limited time we have in any given molecular combination being as kind and as curious as possible.
Hello, Sanhita. Welcome to the 906. We are so excited to have you kicking off season 3.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here.
I'm so thrilled because our focus for season 3, Choose to Challenge, which is what the International Women's Day organization has taken up as a theme for this year. And I'm so excited that they've chosen to go so strong, because women who choose to challenge are always questioned in just numerous different ways. So what does that word challenge or that phrase mean to you?
You know, there's such a difference between the challenges that fall on you that you had no choice but to deal with and challenges that you choose. So I really appreciate the phrasing of this theme of thinking about the world not just as not your life just happening to you, but what are the challenges that you want to take on, that you want to bring all of your energy and talent and everything you have to give, that you would choose to take on. And you have to obviously have a certain amount of privilege, maybe, to even ask yourself that question in time and space. But if you're able to, I think that's the core of a meaningful life, that you are able to intentionally choose things that might be difficult, but mean something to you.
That's such an amazing way to kick this off. At any time, in any day and age, there are lots of challenges that are out there. And sometimes people just get caught up in the passion of the moment, the anxiety of the moment, the frustration of the moment, the desire to find a solution of the moment, and you take on a cause, and then you end up having 15 causes that you're choosing to challenge, but with no intentionality, but just to be there because you want to occupy that space at that moment in time.
Or things are just coming at you and you aren't necessarily finding the space to, I see it like double Dutch, like once you're in a certain rhythm, keeping up is one thing, but sometimes just engaging, figuring out how do I enter, when do I enter, is this the right thing to enter? That can be really intimidating to people. So much so that well-meaning people with resources, with good hearts, that look around and want to do something to make the world a better place, can't figure out that timing or can't figure out that rhythm so that they get plugged into something meaningful. And I see that all around me. And I think people feel depressed, they feel isolated, they feel alienated, even if they have good jobs and are employed and are healthy and everything seems okay, but they just don't feel like they've found their calling in life or they've really contributed to the world, trying to do something with our limited time on this earth, whatever that is, I think is really grounding and inspiring.
Wow. It touched me when you mentioned the story about what you said is absolutely true. And I'm smiling, and I'll have to share this with you later. Why? But yes, people do feel isolated. People do feel alienated. So, how have you gotten through these kind of challenges to find your meaning? So, walk us through what is the journey you went through to help find that meaning, to then know what are those things you're going to stand up and choose to challenge in your life.
Sure, that's a great big question, but I will try. I think if you are asking yourself, I really struggled with this question. So I'm very sympathetic to, what are you passionate about? And there's this reaction of, what am I supposed to say? Maybe if you're an artist and all you've ever wanted to do is play the saxophone and you're passionate about the saxophone, that's a really easy question for you. But I very much lived in a cerebral headspace for a chunk of my life. I really focused on school and professional achievement, and passion doesn't live in headspace, right? It lives in the heart. It lives in your body. It lives in how you feel when you think about something and how it moves you to sacrifice or work hard or be generous. To me, so many really smart, capable people find it really hard to tune in to that inner voice. And you hear that language all the time. Find your voice, find your passion. How do you do that? For me, it has been focusing on, through meditation and self-reflection, it has been really helpful for me to just track what gives me joy and what is the priority, right? Like on a given day, what am I prioritizing? I remember seeing on YouTube this little thing where it was a jar and you had all these ping pong balls and sand and you had to fit it into the jar. The jar was meant to symbolize your life and the ping pong balls were meant to symbolize the things that were really important to you. And the sand was meant to symbolize like everything else. And it was very obvious that if you put the sand in first and then tried to cram in the ping pong balls, you were going to leave out some things that you actually consider really important. But if you put the ping pong balls in first and then just fit the sand around it, then it'll all fit, or it won't, and you don't care, right? It's a simple thing, but that really is the key. So if you sit down and ask yourself, what do I care about most? Like when I get up in the morning, what gives me joy? What gives me excitement? What gives me energy? What do I want to be doing all day? Sometimes there's an answer that is not convenient. That is, I'm a lawyer. I went to law school. I've been practicing for almost 10 years. And on a really deep level, I have felt that something about legal practice, the cerebral nature of it, the very confined nature of conflict, subject to lots and lots of rules. There's things about it that appealed to me, and that's why I got into it, but it does leave something out. It leaves something out about human experience, which is not so well confined, not so easily confined. So the work I'm doing now, it gets to that middle space between the cerebral nature of legal practice and the emotional nature of human life. And you got to draw on both, I think, to really reach people and make progress on whatever it is you care about, whoever you are.
you're passionate about the concept of individual justice. What does this mean, and how does it tie into what you're really focused on right now that you are choosing to challenge?
Hi, everyone. My name is Olivia Cream. If you are a corporate girly and you are struggling, you're feeling stuck, maybe you're feeling underpaid, overqualified, you're struggling with your boss, or bigger yet, you're even trying to clearly articulate what it is that you want from your corporate career, I am the coach for you. So if you're ambitious and you've got goals to accomplish and you want to accomplish them quickly, check out my website, oliviacream.com. I would love to help you reach your goals.
Hi, everybody. I'm Archita Fritz, your other host of the Embracing Only podcast. If you're ready to leave corporate, or you've changed a couple of corporate jobs and want to start a profitable side brilliance, you've made the decision, but you feel unsure of the next steps, here's how I can help you. I can guide you through a successful transition to entrepreneurship to help turn those ideas into profit. So reach out to me on LinkedIn or visit me on architafritz.com to accelerate your empowered transitions. Now, back to the episode.
I have been practicing as a trial attorney at the district attorney's office of Philadelphia, where I spent about 1.5 years prosecuting criminal cases in court. And then I have now moved over, I guess I spent about 2 years doing that. And I have just moved over to this new project, Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission, intended to address racism in the criminal justice system. So individual justice, it is different from, there's a concept in civil cases, so as opposed to criminal cases, where you're trying to make a person whole. Someone has been hurt and you're trying to make that person whole. So whether you were intentionally hurt that person or not, maybe it was they slipped on your sidewalk and you didn't mean for them to get hurt, but they did. And you didn't put salt down and that was your fault. And now you owe them and you pay their hospital bills. Okay, so that is not about punishment. It is not about rehabilitation. It is not about sending a message to society beyond our sidewalks. But in the criminal justice system, it's different. So we are expressing a collective outrage at a certain kind of behavior, and we are punishing the person regardless of whether or not that is helpful to anyone he or she has harmed. So we have built an entire complex around that, right? So when we talk about individual justice, the idea is to go back to that concept of, hey, you have brought this person here to punish them and ideally alter their behavior and create someone who is behaving in a way that society approves of, as opposed to expresses outrage over. But we have a system in place that is operating every day that disproportionately impacts particularly Black men, but people of color in general. And it really is a system. So people get confused when you say something abstract like that, right? Okay, it's a system. Are you accusing me of being racist? What do you mean it's a system? What are we talking about? So let me give you an example of what I mean when I say it's a system. So as a DA, as a prosecutor, I would routinely go into court with 12, 15 cases, some days 40 cases, if it's just what we call preliminary hearings, not full trials. So the volume is very high. And most of your case files necessarily are dealing only with the crime that is being alleged, that's being charged, right? It's not like you're getting a case file on the whole person. Like you're getting a little bit about their criminal history. But if they're nice to grandma on the weekends and getting groceries for grandma and her neighbors, that's not part of your case file, right? All you are seeing is this little slice of their life where they did something that pulled them into this. And the allegation itself, whether it's the sale of narcotics or a simple assault or whatever it is, that language is almost exactly the same for each person. It changes a little bit, the name and address of who the complainant is or where the drugs were being sold. Those things are going to change. But necessarily, the actual description of the crime is going to be more or less the same. So unless that person has a lawyer who is going to go to great lengths to really bring to the prosecutor, that's me in this situation, a fuller picture of that person, each defendant I'm prosecuting is pretty much indistinguishable from the next. So unless someone has a really long record or something stands out in some way, for the most part, you can't tell the difference between someone who's going to respond well to a slap on the wrist versus someone who really needs a lot of counseling, would respond well to therapy or other social services, right? Versus someone who really poses a public safety risk. Like, no one is distinguishing that way. And we're trying to, so when we talk about individual justice, we're trying to get to a place where we do better, not just at, quote, punishing a person in this abstract sense, but in doing a goal that actually serves the public good, meaning that person, that their victim, if they have one, their victims' families, their communities, taking into account this broader pool of people that are necessarily affected every time we prosecute a case. And again, we do it thousands and thousands of times a year.
Yeah.
So there is a systematic nature, and you feel that systematic nature in the anonymity of the files, or not anonymity, you have names, but just the lack of depth of information that you get. And then adding to that, and I've really felt this in court, right? You're standing in front of the judge. The defendant is at a table next to you, also facing the judge with his or her counsel, and usually his, right? Almost always male, almost always Black. And that person is represented by an attorney who is the person you're speaking with. You're not speaking to the defendant, right? You're speaking with that person's counsel most of the time. And sometimes you're not even really having a conversation with your counsel, depending on the nature of the case or whatever else is going on. But at no point am I speaking directly with the defendant. And the defendant has a right to silence. The defendant has a right to remain silent. That's core in our system and really important. And I believe in it. That protects the defendant legally. But we lose something in the sense that we never get a sense of the defendant's humanity. Because I never get to hear him speak. The court certainly never gets to hear him speak until he's already pled guilty and is being sentenced or is expressing remorse and whatever else is going. You might get to it after the fact, but in that crucible, which is an open criminal case, is a crucible of sorts, you're never getting a sense of that person. And I find that I didn't even really realize how much that mattered until I started working on these cases where I prosecute. Over the last year, I've been prosecuting police officers. And the complainants in those cases are often poor young people that were defendants in a different criminal case, and during which the police somehow abused their rights. So all of a sudden you start hearing the rest of the story, all of the context, everything else that was going on before they were brought in for trial. And I'm looking at their case file and thinking to myself, what would I have thought of this person based on the case file? How would I have prosecuted this case? Versus, how do I feel now that I've spoken to this person? Do I perceive this person as a public threat in the same way? And which is the truth, right? Is the case file the more objective truth? Or is the more objective truth the part that includes something about this person's humanity? And we are so afraid of making a mistake in the criminal justice system. We're just almost afraid to look this problem in the eye and really acknowledge the humanity of the people that we are sentencing. Because the effect is it becomes very difficult to just throw people away. You just can't do it. But it tells you something. So what I'm doing now is working on something called the Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission. The original version of this was created in South Africa after the fall of apartheid, when Nelson Mandela became president. The idea was to allow people an extrajudicial body that wasn't subject to standard legal rules of evidence or testimony and prosecution and all of that, and allow them to come forward, and thousands of them did, to tell their stories about what happened to them during apartheid. What happened to them, what happened to their families, what are the violence and human rights violations that they experienced at the hands of the state. And at the same time, people who had participated in that violence, members of the state, police officers and otherwise, who wanted to come forward and say, this is what we were doing. Or, ma'am, I'm sorry to tell you, this is what happened to your son, right? But I was there. I saw it. These are the records. I can tell you what happened to him and finally give you some answers as to how he died. That had a huge effect of healing and addressing pain and questions and human connection, and would not have been possible in a standard judicial context, because the perpetrator obviously would be prosecuted or would never come forward, would never admit to anything without some kind of understanding that we're going to move forward from here.
I did not realize that this was so tied into the work you are doing and what you are trying to uncover in a country that does not believe this is a problem. Sanhita,
how do you explain to people that this is a problem without presenting the testimony of the people that can explain that this is a problem, right? So these are people that so often are marginalized, discriminated against, and just not taken seriously, so that they never get a platform to tell their story, to just tell their story. This is what happened to me. Because you can argue all day about opinions. This is what I think we should do. Defund the police, abolish prisons, send them all to jail, whatever. You can go back and forth about political opinions all day. But everyone has a right to their own story if they're telling the truth or trying to tell the truth from a sincere place, right? Everybody knows what happened to them, right? So if you get people to share their stories, it's much easier to understand where people are coming from. And when they're saying a political opinion, underlying it is always a story or many stories about how they got to that opinion. So part of it is giving marginalized people a platform to speak with the credibility and just audience that being associated with the district attorney's office can provide. So we are lending our authority to folks that should have that authority on their own, but don't get it, right? So we're trying to address that. And at the same time, offer a forum to address some of the most difficult, painful, disputed issues facing our country at a time where everybody is divided very deeply in a hyper-partisan, hyper-hostile environment. So to try to get out of that framework and move into a space where let's talk about what's going on, right? What is your story? Forget political opinions. What is your story? Let's hear it and let's see what we hear, because people have something to say. And I think we would all benefit from that. And we're at a point in our national history coming out of the killing of Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown and Ferguson, and through, this summer with the murder of George Floyd, the ascendance of the Black Lives Matter movement, right? There has been a real energy and urgency around addressing racism, not just poverty, not just some of these other phrasings that allow us to dodge the issue of race because it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. It's hard to talk about. But we're doing it. We are experiencing a willingness in this country for the first time in a long time, what we're calling a national reckoning on race, where people are willing to talk about it. I remember I studied abroad in Cape Town in 2006 when I was a junior in college, and people talked about race in Cape Town. right? They talked about it because the history of apartheid was so fresh and the fall of it was so fresh.
Yeah.
It had only been like, 15 years or less. And I remember coming back to the US and being like, we don't talk about this here. Does that mean it's not an issue? You elect Barack Obama president and then you elect Donald Trump president the next time around? Like, how does that happen? What's going on? Are we schizophrenic? Or are we just not able to engage? So we're having these strange manifestations at the highest levels of politics of much deeper rooted issues that we're not able to connect on a human level.
You really have a way with words and like really helping people like understand really complex things. One of the things I learned about you was that you worked at the International Criminal Tribunal.
Hi, everyone. My name is Olivia Cream. If you are a corporate girly and you are struggling, you're feeling stuck, maybe you're feeling underpaid, overqualified, you're struggling with your boss, or bigger yet, you're even trying to clearly articulate what it is that you want from your corporate career, I am the coach for you. So if you're ambitious and you've got goals to accomplish and you want to accomplish them quickly, check out my website, oliviacream.com. I would love to help you reach your goals.
Hi, everybody. I'm Archita Fritz, your other host of the Embracing Only podcast. If you're ready to leave corporate or you've changed a couple of corporate jobs and want to start a profitable side brilliance, you've made the decision, but you feel unsure of the next steps, here's how I can help you. I can guide you through a successful transition to entrepreneurship to help turn those ideas into profit. So reach out to me on LinkedIn or visit me on architafritz.com to accelerate your empowered transitions. Now, back to the episode.
It was a tribunal that was founded in the early 90s while the war in Bosnia was still ongoing. And the portion I worked on related to something called the Srebrenica massacre, on the basis of which a general named Ratko Mladic was charged with genocide, among other things. So I worked on that piece of it as an intern, not just case, on a different individual's case, General Tolomir, who was also charged based on the same incidents in history. I worked on that as an intern when I was in law school, and then I came back 5 years after graduation to work on General Mladic's case, which is one of the biggest fish, you could say, one of the highest level individuals who's a military commander that was responsible for the deaths of 7,000 to 8,000, mostly men and boys, over the course of 5 days in an area, in an enclave known as Srebrenica. He was convicted, so I had been brought in just to help put together the final trial brief on the prosecution's case. I will tell you, it's heavy work, right? It's heavy work.
That's what I was going to ask you. Like, what fuels your passion for justice? I guess there's nothing that's easy when you're trying to fight for justice, but these are not the simplest of convictions or cases. They probably take an emotional toll on you as well as you're processing all of this. So what fuels your passion and how do you manage your energy, your emotional energy as you work through this?
Yeah, when I first arrived, I was really struggling. I was having bad dreams every night, really feeling on an intense emotional level that this work was really tough and enjoying the work, motivated and very immersed, but this feeling of hopelessness or despair. And I asked my colleague Arthur, I was like, you've been here for years. How do you get through the day? Right? I'm trying to be Zen, meditate, think about meaning and humanity and et cetera, et cetera. And people do crazy things to each other that are really bad. How do we live in this world? And he said something to me that really stuck with me forever and I think about frequently. And he said, you read these case files and you're often reading about the worst part of a person's life, especially for victims, the worst thing that ever happened to them. And that's all you focus on as a prosecutor. But I've been here long enough that I see these guys that were shot and walked through the woods for 5 days with injuries or whatever, right? Like, that's all you know about him. But I've seen him 20 years later, and he has grandkids, and he has a life. And that's not to say he isn't traumatized and he isn't carrying that burden. And some people really never recover. That really does happen. And obviously some people just died, right? So they're not here for it. But for those that survived, and some did, there is this sense that life goes on and there is something to live for, and you can be joyous again, and you can recover. People are resilient, shockingly resilient. And I think about this, how do you lift from this place that is so dark? And the thing is, people do. They really do. And it's similar, actually, as I'm saying this, I'm realizing that there's a link between what I'm attributing to my colleague and what he said to me, and what I was saying earlier about the case files about defendants, right? You're seeing only that little slice of the worst thing often that they've ever done. And Brian Stevenson, who's an activist, he's so much more than an activist. He's an inspiration, a writer, a founder of something called the Equal Justice Initiative. He's argued court cases to the Supreme Court. The movie Just Mercy is about him. He likes to say, no one should be judged solely on the worst thing they've ever done. And there's something about that I just didn't understand for a long time. Like, you would say, and I'm like, okay, but what if the worst thing you ever did was really bad, right? But I understand now what he's trying to say as I'm starting to realize how little a given case can tell you about a person. It just, our viewpoint as prosecutors is limited. And that's not our fault. Like, we have our own burdens. We're coming from a place of wanting to do justice. But the thing is, I don't know if you can. I don't know if you can without really taking into account the full picture of a person. And not just a person, their relationships around them, their relationships with victims, the community, like how systematically we are addressing what we're calling crime. And this is, I'm talking to you for almost 40 minutes, and we haven't talked about race at all, really. And it has everything to do with everything, right? Like that tribal picture of who is a threat, who is a victim. So many of the lynchings that took place in the US of Black Americans who were killed, usually brutally, by civilian mobs, most of whom were white, and generally often accompanied or at least allowed to do what they were doing by police, by law enforcement. So many of those lynchings, so many of those murders were built around this idea that the person who is being lynched, who is being killed, committed a crime. Because once you say that person committed a crime, it's okay to do whatever you want to them. Even the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery creates an exception for anyone that has been convicted of a crime. So we have used it to just dehumanize an entire group of people that we were dehumanizing long before we were charging with crimes. We used to, as a country, enslave Black Americans, and then we, muddled through Reconstruction after the Civil War, imposed segregation through Jim Crow laws, and then moved into mass incarceration. Right? So race has everything to do with everything. And anyone, anywhere can be both oppressor or oppressed. But here, today, in America, we have a human rights problem, and we cannot talk about it without talking about race. And it's not just all lives matter. There's a reason the movement is Black Lives Matter. I am not Black, but I can see that. We should all be able to see that. Once we're able to focus and accept that, look, race is hard to talk about. It's just hard. It's just hard. It's easy to offend. It's easy to make a mistake. It's easy to say something stupid or ignorant, but we have to talk about it. We have to talk about it and focus on it specifically, because if you give people an out, you give people an exit, they will take it. They will talk about anything other than race. We'll talk about poverty. We'll talk about immigration. We'll talk about gender.
Growing up in India, there is the caste system. It's rampant, it's all around you, and that is very much the beginnings of a lot of what we're seeing with racism.
I just wanted to comment on just what you just said. So Isabel Wilkerson has written this book, Caste, which is phenomenal. And she talks about race being the skin color or the skin of a system, but caste being the bones. So the fundamental power structure is underneath. And what is the outward marker of whether you're high status or low status, dominant caste or subordinate caste, can change from context to context. So in India, we do not distinguish black versus white because that doesn't make sense, right? Everybody's brown. But we distinguish along a gradation. We distinguish based on light-skinned or dark-skinned. We distinguish according to caste. We distinguish according to religion. But underlying all of those distinctions is a power politics of asserting dominance and placing a certain group and a certain unfortunate group into a place where everyone else tries to keep them subordinated. So that human pattern, we see it everywhere. So this is not to say that that's the key piece, I think, to understanding race, to not vilify individuals that are participating in a system as if they are just morally reprehensible, because the system itself puts you in that position. And in order to not engage in that system requires real thought and real effort to be anti-racist, right? To be fighting that system. Because if you're just going about your day and thinking to yourself, but I didn't hurt anybody, what's the problem? Right? Like, you're part of a system. And I was part of a system as a DA, as a prosecutor. I was part of a system, right? As someone in India who comes from a family of landowners that is educated, that is now educated, right? I come from a certain level of privilege as a young person who was brown, foreign, immigrant, female, growing up in a largely white part of Michigan. Was also part of a system, but a different part, right? So you can experience privilege, you can experience lack of privilege. We all experience varieties of it. But to me, none of that should lose sight of the long-running, deeper, flagrant human rights violation that is sewn into the fabric of American history, and specifically in its treatment of African Americans. Like, we just cannot run from that. And the longer we run from it, the ghosts of that history have followed us from the founding of slavery in 1619, through the Revolution, through the Civil War, through Reconstruction, through the Civil Rights era, and well into the 21st century. Where, guys, we gotta just deal with it. Just deal with it. But if we do, many of us see it as the key to liberation for everybody else, right? If you can look this monster square in the eye and slay it, then you can do anything, in my view. So that's where I'm coming from. That's why I'm invested in this work. And I really want to come at it from a place of love for humanity and what people are capable of in the good sense, even while acknowledging what they are capable of in the monstrous sense. We are both. We are capable of both. And it takes real work and real intentional courage, I think, on everyone's part to engage with these issues. Because you want to talk about choose to challenge, right? If you are subject to racism on a day-to-day basis, you're not choosing that challenge. It's coming at you whether you like it or not. And that sucks. That's unfortunate, and it is what it is. But if you are choosing to acknowledge your own privileges and recognize the ways that the system we're in is serving you, no matter who you are, we all have some privilege, right? If you're willing to engage with that, not because you want to apologize to make yourself feel better. It's not about that, but to recognize that it's in operation. That if there's a stat that I find helpful for this purpose, they did an experiment where they sent out resumes with black sounding names and white sounding names, with a criminal record and without a criminal record. And they found that if you are black with no criminal record, you are less likely to get a call back from an employer with the same resume, same qualifications, than if you are white with a criminal record. That's racism, right? It's just racism. And it's subconscious often. It's just, the less we talk about it, the more likely you are to engage in it, to make mistakes, or not even make mistakes. Like maybe some people have intentionally bigoted attitudes, and that's a different thing. But you're vulnerable to race-based arguments because you don't grasp the history. You don't grasp that this isn't the first time we've considered just choosing to be racist or choosing to be fascist or choosing to be segregationist. We know how that goes. That cannot be the future of humanity. It does not work, and honor what is best in each other. That's really important.
The thing is that it's been so much done to document, and we've all witnessed what's happened in the US, in America, right? For most of the world, but systemic racism has tie-ins to colonialism in numerous ways as well, and has been perpetuated by colonialism. And the challenge I've been struggling with, to be honest with you, this past year, ever since George Floyd, is that in places where, just by the nature of where people come from, people say we're diverse. So in Europe, people be like, oh, we're diverse. This is not a problem here. Like, I'm continuing to educate myself on this, but it irks me because it's such a cop-out when we say that this is not a problem here. And my question is, how do we go about unearthing and engaging in real conversations to even make people realize that we should consider this as a problem? Forget that it's a problem. I'm just thinking about listeners, especially who are here in Europe. How do they act? How do they inform themselves? And what should they be doing to really decide if they choose to or not, choose to challenge that misconception that because we're diverse, we have equity, we have belonging, we have inclusion in this part of the world?
Yeah, I think if you are looking at Europe, one of the things that becomes fairly clear fairly quickly is that whiteness as an identity, right, whether it's in Europe or it's in the US, has grown out of a diverse pool of people, right? Like some people identify as German, some people identify as French. There was a period where Italians didn't count as white or Jews didn't count as white. But once you introduce black people, all of a sudden those folks are white, right? So there is a history around that psychology of in-group, out-group, who you are willing to let in based on who you are keeping out, and vice versa. So Europe's racism problem, and I'm not as well versed in obviously what is happening necessarily in Europe, but in the work that I've done in Europe,
of course,
the Bosnian Muslims that were subject to the Srebrenica massacre were ostensibly white. So in that sense, it's not a racial issue, but there is this drive to create tribal identity around a characteristic that has nothing to do with the individual, his or her character traits or contributions or thoughts or feelings, just on a group level, and to just create a power structure that benefits your own group, right? That's the driving underlying political force, like the cast of bones, right? So when people say, we are diverse because we have French speakers and German speakers, so we don't need to worry about what we are doing with Syrian refugees or whatever, right? But usually what I'm hearing is, let's look at this part we're doing well and not talk about this other part that's more uncomfortable, that's more difficult, what hasn't been resolved and is not about to get resolved. So again, people are always running from the fundamental underlying power conversation, because really, what do you do with that? Like, how do you create a world that is free of that? It requires a real investment in imagination. But I truly believe it can be done. And not just that it can be done, that it's essential, that it's the only way humanity moves forward, right? Out of the dark ages of tribalism and into a future where we can really see each other.
I love this investment in imagination. That is so powerful for people who want to do this kind of work and are sitting in corporate rooms around the world. Is it worth their time investing in trying to engage, trying to drive an investment in imagination, support within those structures, which is corporations that are going to do things a certain way? They have certain rules, and they're happy to do some things, but they're not going to do everything because their goals are different. So do people spend their time there, or do they step away and say that, what if I truly want to make an impact, I got to take this energy and go give it somewhere else, out there in society where I can make an impact, versus within this structural code of sorts?
That's a great question, because I think you would get different answers from different people. So some people would say, if you're not spending every day dismantling capitalism, you are wasting your life. I should say I spent 4 years at a law firm in Manhattan, and I love my firm. They were good people. It was one of the more diverse offices because it was in New York. And I know that there was a lot of intention around hiring and support for individuals that weren't whatever white male privileged image you might have of corporate lawyers. And I understand that struggle. I really do. And you have to remember, like, a job is a combination of lots of things for different people. So for some people, it really is just a livelihood. Like, I got to pay my bills, I got to eat, and I'm working in order to eat. If I didn't have to work, if someone paid me this money and I didn't have to work, I wouldn't work. I would throw in my apron and not report to work till, like, I'm done. And then for some people, it's more of a calling. It's more like, I would do this for free. I would do this all day, every day. And I'm just looking around to find an opportunity to get someone that allows me to make a livelihood out of this thing I'm already wanting to do all day. So for some people, it's that. And kind of the other extreme. Corporate professionals, I have found, are for the most part neither. So they certainly are well off enough that they're not really operating at a subsistence level. But I have noticed a certain psychology around it,
Right.
that doesn't totally recognize that. There's this kind of like bottomless desire to feel financially secure and to feel emotionally secure. I don't know who I am without this institutional prestige attached to my name. Like, I am not sure that I will. So I do see that in people, and I say this with a lot of gentleness and kindness. I understand that, but especially, and I understand that especially if you're a minority and everyone takes you seriously because you're an associate at so-and-so law firm. But what if you're nobody, and then nobody listens to you anymore? And then what happens to you? Are you just going to disappear?
Yeah.
And the answer is no, you're not going to disappear. You're not going to disappear, especially if you have a strong voice and you can find it under any circumstances. But I'm not going to tell anybody what to do. People have different needs. They have different priorities. They have different drivers. They have different things that make them happy or give them joy. But I will say only that there's a quotation attributed to Gandhi that's something like, what you think and what you say and what you do is in harmony, right? That is the basis of a good and happy life. The Greek philosophers talk about it like, unhappiness is a division between your mind and what you are doing all day, right? That is a deep root of unhappiness. But if this is important to you, and I would argue it should be. Should doesn't really mean anything in this world. Like, you have to figure out what is or isn't important to you. If it is important to you, and you want to engage and you're not going to leave your corporate job, right? Like you want to, within the corporate context, be as true to your values as you can possibly be. There are ways to do that. And I think that people, when people change their minds,
Yeah.
like they rarely change their minds because somebody like yelled at them, somebody that they don't know or don't trust or don't like. But if they're close to someone, if they have a relationship with someone and they respect that person as a peer, or they have a relationship in trust, and that person says to them something that strikes them as, oh, I didn't think about that, or I wouldn't have picked up that book, or I wouldn't have, gone to that rally, or I wouldn't, this is the code that all these social networking websites have cracked, right? If you hear it from a friend, it is the most effective advertising there is. Like no advertising is going to be as compelling as hearing it from somebody you know and
Right.
trust saying, I love this, works, this is awesome. So there's a social networking aspect to dismantling racism. So if you are, certainly if you're a white man in one of these contexts, and you can use your privilege and your platform to make room for voices that don't naturally have access to that privilege, right? Pay attention to your female colleagues. Are they getting drowned out? Pay attention to, when you talk about racism, is it three white guys that, occupy most of the space in that conversation? When someone speaks from an authentic experience, are people able to listen without getting defensive? That in itself is a huge part of the conversation. Including folks who are trying to dismantle racism in our system are constantly falling over themselves to try and not say something ignorant, especially if you're not a minority, right? If you're coming from a well-meaning place, but you keep asking, like, but what am I supposed to be saying? What am I supposed to be doing? And the right question to ask, I think, is how do I make space? Right? It's not about what you're saying. It's, can you listen? Can you absorb? It is very hard to explain to people that have occupied a lot of space for most of their lives that this doesn't require you to speak. The thing that we're asking of you is give up your platform, give up your space, and give it to someone that is not getting it, but has something relevant to say.
But in the corporate realm, when a minority is the one who is, give me the space, I'm one of few who is able to speak and raise their voice, you're guilty of wanting the limelight and not doing it for the sake of truly the cause, which is you care about this so deeply. You want to educate folks on it because you hear these questions constantly. There was a study that just came out from Harvard Business Review, I think 2 days ago, around this, is that when minorities lean in and speak up on conversations around DE&I, race, etc., whatever, within corporate structures, they're penalized for speaking up versus white men or women. They're given space. They're given space in minds of everybody to speak up. And that is exhausting because then when I think about individuals who come from so many different backgrounds, and I continuously encourage them to use their space to speak up if they are willing to or able to or want to, I almost have to ask myself the question, should I even encourage that? Because they're not white, they're not a man. And if I do that, do I put them at risk of that same kind of discrimination or bias that others before them have experienced? And then do they get disillusioned?
Well, something about what you're talking about makes me think of a chapter. So I'm reading Barack Obama's new book, Promised Land, and he's talking about making the decision to run for president and the level of hubris that requires, just like pure self, aggrandizement, megalomania, narcissism. Am I just a crazy person? So he's taking us into his mind as he's making this decision. And the way he tells the story, his wife, Michelle, asks him, why does it have to be you? Why do you need to do this? Yeah. Which is to me a version of, are you doing this for the limelight? Or are you actually trying to help somebody? And the response he gives is, regardless of what I do as president, the fact that I ran it all and won it all, if I win, will give people, young people, a sense of what is possible. And that is enough. And there's something in that I think is really important. So if you speak up in these corporate settings, which by no means are more impregnable than British colonial government, for example, right? Like there's people are willing to listen. They just may or may not always give you the feedback that makes you feel heard. So you really have to take care of yourself too, right? To do this kind of work.
Yeah.
You have to connect with people that support you. That's why I reached out to Meha and you and this little group. So I was just like, this work is hard and I feel lonely and I feel terrified and I feel stressed all the time, but it's really important and I want to do this well and I want to stay charged because otherwise I can't do it.
Yeah.
So how do I do that? What do I need? What do I need? How do I build solidarity with other folks that are experiencing this? How do I help them and ask them to help me? And who are the people that are making me crazy? And what is the approach that I want to take with that conflict? If I'm really angry and that anger is real and it's tied into my professional advancement and everything else, so that may be worth a fight. And if it's junior people, how am I advising them? Like, how do I tell them fight this fight when I know it's going to cost them a level and the payoff in the future? So there's a concept around this, also a Gandhi quote, but something like, you never know what fruit your actions are going to bear, but you have to do the right thing. And it may not bear fruit in your time, in your place or in your time. But if you do nothing, there will definitely be no fruit. And I think of it, there's also a saying in the Unitarians like to say, we all sit in the shade of trees we did not plant. And that is as it should be, so long as we plant trees for others. That is the nature of human connection. We don't always see the benefits of our own work, but we benefit from the good works of others. And we try to do good works to benefit posterity. So I hear you, and somewhere between committing to doing the right thing no matter what and taking care of yourself when you need to, I think there's an answer, right?
But you said this, and I was like, oh shit, she's describing me, which is people really associate their sense of security, emotional security, sense of belonging, and everything with this corporate brand. When I came to America, I was told the only thing you need to ensure is that at the end of 4 years, you have a job so you can have a better life for yourself, because you're not going to have that if you come back to India or wherever else. So that's what I was told as I got on a plane, got to the US. And God, I'm going to get emotional about this, but my quest as a 17-year-old, overcompensating on doing a million activities. So having 8 jobs on campus, doing so many different things, like, I enjoyed all of that, but like really stretching yourself to get a job. And at 18, I still remember this. I went to the career fair. I went to IBM first and I shook hands and I was like, hi, I'm Archita. Nice to meet you. The first question the recruiter asked me was, Archita, nice to meet you. Do you need a visa? He did not even ask me, nothing else. First question. That was my first experience with what they had told me you need to do here. And this first sense of anxiety, like if I don't get this, because his first question is, do I need a visa? And I said, yes, I do. He said, oh, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you. And I was like, what? And so then the next company I go to is my company. And that person doesn't ask me, do you need a visa? That person asked me, tell me more about yourself. I want to get to know you. And then when that company like brings you in, you have such a strong sense of yourself in that place, because you were only going to be worthy for people back home if you had a job after those 4 years.
The pressure is real. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm struggling right now to disassociate with it. So I'm really trying to understand, like for a lot of us immigrant minorities who moved over here, where we have lived in constant fear.
There's something about this story that is so humanizing of you and what drives you and your fears and your ambitions and your goals and the things that are built into your algorithms and how you process the world around you. So I just want to go back to that point of how important stories are and how important realizing what your own narratives are and what your own idea of the world is and where it comes from. That in many ways is essential. So there's that. But I'm also really moved by your story because I know so many people that have experienced that, and my parents, and I was born in India, but My parents did the real hard work of coming over here, and I became a citizen when I was 15. My best friend went through this. So many people I know went through this. Story always strikes home. So many Black Americans go through this, who are also immigrants, in addition to everything else they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, because their families came from Haiti or the Dominican or other parts of the Western world. But so this is a deeper cultural trauma. But the thing that underlies it is the same thing that underlies racism or the other structural oppressions we experience, which is the first question you're going to ask me is this, and it's the only question you're going to ask me. So it doesn't matter what else I've done. I can't outrun this by working harder, by being smarter, by giving more of myself somehow. I can't outrun this.
Exactly.
And that's oppression, right? That is the nature of oppression, right? It doesn't matter who I am. So when we talk about individual justice, or we talk about this idea that there's a person here, it matters who you are. And we are here for that. Right? I want to connect to who you are. Who I am wants to connect to who you are. Right? That basic humanity is always cut short by these oppressive structures. A root for empathy for other people.
Yeah.
Because that suffering is the root of empathy. If you suffer, it gives you a language to understand how other people suffer. And trauma has this effect where not only does the underlying incident impact your life, whatever that is, but then how you coped with that trauma, how you got through the day by being hard charging, by taking up space, whether someone gives it to you or not, right? Like developing that raw energy, that's like your coping mechanism. And it isn't until 5 years later, 10 years later, 15 years later, maybe, where you're like, do I need to scale? My brother and I talk about this idea of being in a lifeboat in the ocean when you're young. And this lifeboat is your life, right? It saves your life and you cling to it. And it is the thing that gets you through rough seas. And then one day you emerge from a difficult childhood or whatever traumas you suffered, and you find yourself on land, and you're so grateful and you're so happy to have reached stability, but you're not letting go of your lifeboat. And for the next 10 years, you're showing up at dinner, you're showing up at class, and you've got your lifeboat with you. That is what defense mechanisms are like. They follow you because you cannot imagine letting go of this piece of you that kept you safe. But what are you going to do?
My lifeboat is my visa status. And I know that I do not have that sense of freedom.
Totally. I'm thinking of Nina Simone, and she's asked at some point, what is freedom? Or what do you think freedom is? And she says, freedom is no fear. Freedom is no fear. And that's so deep. Like the opposite of love, I think, is not hate, it's fear. And fear will crush you in all kinds of ways. Even if you're not actually under threat, you will pull back your own dreams. You will set your own limits. And we all do it. We have to be practical. We have to be real. We're trying to survive. We're all trying to do that. Some facing more challenges than others. So again, to your theme of choosing to challenge, you have to choose what you are willing to take on, what you're willing to add to your plate that isn't already there. Right? Because some of these challenges you did not choose.
Right.
But for those of us that, especially those of us that are close to that oppression, right? We're one generation out, or we're only a few years out, or we're not even out yet.
Yeah.
We hope to be, right? That oppression is so real. So we have to find light and find joy in our lives despite that oppression. That's important. We have to connect with others and empathize with them through that suffering as a vehicle for connection.
Yeah.
And then if that energizes you enough and gives you solidarity and makes you feel brave, then you choose to challenge that oppression and you take on the fight in whatever way you can. It's important that we honor that experience of our own and not just berate ourselves for not trying to do everything all the time. It doesn't work.
No, exactly. I love that honoring. So this is the question we ask all our guests on the 906. What do you love the most about yourself, Sanhita?
The most about myself? Wow, what a question. I think the capacity to learn. I think if you have a capacity to learn and approach the world with curiosity, you can avoid a lot of just unnecessary suffering. You're still going to suffer. Everybody suffers.
Yeah.
But you don't, if someone says something rude to you, for example, and your first reaction isn't, I'm a mess that person up because they wronged me and I'm angry, and you're feeling this escalation, right? But if your first reaction is instead, no, I wonder why they just said that to me. Like, I wonder why they just came at me with that. It makes it much easier to just be like, because it's not me. This isn't me. This is you. You are having an issue. I don't know what it is. Maybe I can help you. Maybe not. But I'm not going to internalize negative abuse or energy from someone else. And that's really tough. That's really, really hard. So it doesn't always work, to be honest. But sometimes it does. And it's just, I think that I have tried to develop that capacity very intentionally. And it has always served me, because whenever I feel stuck, I feel confident that I have seen such a small slice of the world in my own life that someone somewhere in space or time in history or across the world, someone somewhere has dealt with this problem and is hopefully just a Google hit away, but maybe not. Maybe I need to do more searching to find some wisdom that can guide me here. But being open to that there's wisdom out there, whether you have it yet or not.
Yeah.
I think keeps you grounded and keeps you from losing your mind or despairing.
Love that. This has just been such a beautiful conversation. It has been deeply empowering. Thank you so very much for kicking off season 3 for us.
Thank you. And I don't want to get off this podcast without saying that I grew up in the 906.
Yes.
And I should mention that this is an area code that is near and dear to my heart. I will point out that it is snowing out here in Philadelphia, and I just feel like I just had this little drift into my childhood.
I love it. Love it.
Just like reconnecting to this piece of my life.
Absolutely.
So, thank you for that.
No, absolutely. Thank you for choosing to challenge within the spaces that you have chosen to give your energy. And thank you for empowering all of us here today on the 906 to identify and explore whether we should choose to challenge and give our energy where needed as well, in the spaces that need them. Thanks for being on the 906.
Thank you so much. You too.
Learn more about our podcast. Check us out at the906.com. The 906 is produced by Meha Chiraya and Archita Fritz. Subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform to tune in and hear the stories that'll elevate and inspire you.